Me liberals won't let me say racial slurs. If you got linked to this video, you've probably said that conservatism is the new punk. And you've probably also clicked out by now because you don't really care about what that statement means, you just want to look cool. Pretty punk so far. The phrase has been making the rounds lately in the past couple of years, mainly due to the election of Donald J. Trump. By the way, J, of course, standing for jawbreaker. But, surprise, surprise, the reactionaries are lying to you. So, when you watch this video, I'm going to try and be as impartial as possible to the claims made that conservatism is the new punk rock. But, spoiler alert, it gets increasingly hard throughout this video to take it seriously. I will try, though. And unfortunately, that means watching a Paul Joseph Watson video, because he seems to be the big touter of this movement, I guess?
Conservatism is the new punk rock.
For the record, I've never watched a Paul Joseph Watson video in its entirety without, like, framing or commentary by, like, a contradicting opinion. So, I submitted myself to this video, and let's just say I was not a fan. Holy shit, folks. He has no idea what he's talking about. By the way, folks, I'm trying to cut back on my drinking, so I took the label off of this, even though on the sides you can kind of see it. I'm gonna use this red unnamed aid. I will call it mutual aid. So let's take a look at Conservatism is the New Punk Rock by Paul Joseph Watson. Okay, so first of all, I have to say, this is an 8-minute video that he put out, and for the first full minute, he is just jerking himself off about talking about how he tweeted conservatism is the new punk rock, and then the leftist Twitter mob came after him.
In fact, I've never seen so many members of the lefty Twitterati so triggered as when I tweeted conservatism is the new counterculture. So I tweeted it again, and again, and again, and again. Seriously, I know the word triggered gets overused now, but this was a deluge of butthurt.
And he's complaining about it, but reveling in it, and he says that they're triggered, and he likes that they're triggered, but he spends an eighth of the fucking video talking about this, and...
The gay lobby.
Oh, nope. Trying to be impartial. Let's get to the claims.
Now he's calling Donald Trump a bitch. Oh, how daring.
So his first weird tangent is talking about Eminem, surprisingly not punk, how he pissed off everybody at the beginning of his career, generating tons of controversy, and now he's going after Trump. These are kind of two disconnected things. Like, Eminem was edgy in the beginning, and he's kind of edgy now, but he was also just rapping about what he thought, and he thinks Trump is bad. You can, like, think that it's tired and old hat what Eminem does. Like, yeah, of course Trump is bad, maybe we should go into it a little bit more, but that doesn't make the statement wrong. You can say orange man bad all you want, but, like, if you say that and you agree with Trump, your position is just orange man good, and that's the most useless thing ever. It's that virtue signal argument that that H. Bomber guy went through. Punks, of course, have never called out the presidents of the United States for their terrible policies. It's not like there were two separate movements to kind of go against Bush or Reagan. Someone would say rock against Bush or rock against Impartial? Impartial? What's his next claim?
But up until very recently, the right had been getting its ass kicked in the culture war for decades.
So he goes into the point that the left has taken over the dominant culture and forced the conservatives into the counterculture. I would love to know what he means by that. Does he mean that beatniks and hippies and synth wavers and disco people have taken over? There's not a lot of explicitly leftist bias in Hollywood. If you know of plenty of films that tell you to seize the means of production, I would love to see them. I have seen Sorry to Bother You. That's not a Hollywood movie. Surprisingly enough, he doesn't source a lot of his claims. He does source one, though, and that was from the Daily Mail, famously reputable, and it says that 14% of Gen Zers are conservative compared to 1% of millennials. Now, so I found a Pew Research piece that compared millennials and Gen Z's political leanings. Turns out there's only a 1% difference in approval of President Trump in office between millennial and Gen Z. So it doesn't seem like they're that much more conservative than millennials. So when it looked into Republican Gen Z specifically, it found that 43% of them were more likely to say that black people had it harder than white people than the 30% of millennials who would say the same thing. Incidentally, 43% is still way too fucking low. So maybe Paul didn't look past this one article. And also, I have no idea what the fuck this has to do with punk. Does he say that young people are punk? How the fuck does that work? But it's easy to see the through line here. Paul's talking about these kids who write to him and saying they're sick of being forced to learn gender studies.
Sick to the back teeth of being forced to sit in classes about gender studies or colonialism.
I tried to look through US curriculums and see if it was being taught, but all I could find was articles about the discrepancy of male historical figures versus female historical figures, and that's not gender studies, that's just gendered history. Interestingly enough, though, kids will complain about a lot of things. I had to learn about math and I fucking hated it, and complained about it, but I still had to learn it. Incidentally enough, gender studies is science, so maybe these kids should fucking learn science.
Your joyless, censorious, puritanical persecution of Milo is exactly what's turned him into a complete rock star.
Jesus Christ, does he actually fucking say anything in this video? Here he goes. He says he's not talking about old establishment Republicans. You know, the ones who are riding the wave of Trumpism and the alt-right and reactionary rise, and how did that get here?
You can think of it as cultural libertarianism.
Cultural libertarianism. Is this video just buzzwords? Okay, so he says don't come at him with any movement that counters this narrative that he's built because nobody's ever heard of him, but you started off the video by railing against feminists, so feminism? Maybe that's one you've heard of, Paul?
The other thing is, I don't know what it is about this profile image, but it triggers the holy hell out of leftists.
Oh, okay, so now he's going to spend the rest of the video talking about how people on Twitter were mean to his profile picture and how it Dude, what the fuck? Okay, maybe he wasn't the best start for this video topic. Okay, so I just want to be clear. I am going to loop back around to the whole counterculture attitude of conservatism being punk, but I want to kind of examine the roots of conservative punk talking points for a bit, so I'll loop back to this at the end of the video. Yeah, not a lot of good claims in this, but I'm sure there's actually a publication that has taken this to heart and actually tried to examine it. Examine it. The Washington Examiner. They ran a piece called "Was Punk Right Wing?" This will be a great place to start. They're actually like an accredited publication, and you know they're not like a top tier, but like they're not a rag. So like let's look into it. Okay, first claim here. Malcolm McLaren, the anarchist conceptual agitator behind the Sex Pistols, may have scorned commodity capitalism. The same Malcolm McLaren who formed the Sex Pistols to advertise his clothing shop? He hated commodity capitalism? Okay, so he goes on to say that there was a nascent right-wing attitude in punk. And let's take a pit stop on this road trip of just pure spite and scorn to say that's true. But it was the 1970s. Everything had a nascent right-wing underlying attitude to it unless you consciously saw all of your biases and tried to work against them. Something tells me in the 1970s that was not the norm. So saying conservatism is the new punk rock is essentially doing the exact same thing as saying conservatism is the new veganism, disco, beatnik, hippie. Conservatism is the new disco. Actually, that's not fair. Disco is actually pretty dope, but I'll die on this hill. It goes on to completely misunderstand and botch an interview that Joe Strummer of The Clash did, and it's trying to paint him as a hypocrite, which, first of all, it fails at doing, and second of all, if he was a hypocrite, that still wouldn't make him not left-wing. Or is it just trying to discredit the left wing of punk? What?
What's all this communism jazz?
Let me tell you, my politics are, and I've always been, and always will be, to the left. I'm not into fucking people working away in factories doing useless, boring jobs just for some cunt to take the rake off. But I don't want to say that I'm a socialist or that I'm a communist, because I fucking hate parties and party doctrine. So that's what it is, the communist jazz. The fact is we are left and that we ain't into any sort of capitalist scene like it's set up. So they say what they want in the papers. They con everybody and they've got control of the media and they can say what they want you to think.
You think that's capitalist?
Yeah, they're capitalists.
I don't think so. Capitalism is a way of distributing wealth.
Yeah, but look at the way it operates in England. Lorry drivers on strike, right?
That's socialism.
All the press has printed strike stories just to whip up the feeling of, bring in the army, break up the strike, when all those fucking guys wanted was 60 quid a week, and that to me is the way the capitalist system works.
So this guy, John Holmstrom, the editor of Jolly and Punk magazines, that's why he's interviewing Joe Strummer, says that England in the 1980s was socialist. I'm sorry, babe. I'm trying to cut back, but I just... These arguments are dumber than I expected. They also try to say that he's almost supported left-wing terrorism, which, one, he didn't, and two, wouldn't that make him more left-wing? Now, none of these are actually sound arguments for punk being conservative. I'm really trying here. The article mentions a band called Modern Love as a proto-punk band with conservative leanings, and that's true, but, you know, there's also The Stooges, MC5, Blue Cheer. I could keep going on. By the way, MC5, as a matter of fact, one of the biggest influences on punk there, was formed because mainly of an influence of the White Panther Party, which was the white offshoot of the Black Panther Party. It had radical Marxist ideals. To be fair, they cite a band called the Swinging Madisons, and their song Guilty White Liberal, which was released in 1981, has 526 views on YouTube, and isn't even a fucking punk song. Dude, 2 of my videos have more views than that. What the fuck are you talking about? Getting a little heated. Impartial. Impartial. Okay, so the main kicker of the article is John Lydon of the Sex Pistols being conservative and supporting Trump, which is true, and he did it 40 years after he was relevant. But yes, he did. Considering how John Lydon only gained prominence from Malcolm McLaren, who used them to sell clothes at his shop called Sex, and they had a huge falling out, I'd say we've covered him enough. But this is a good segue into the 3 figures that people hold up to say that conservatism is punk, and it always has been. Here's why. The first one, John Lydon. We talked about him. The second one, this is the worst one. We have to talk about it. Johnny Ramone. The Ramones' influence can't be overstated in punk. They basically created the 3-chord progression that punk built off of. The energy, the speed, the leather jackets. Yeah, the Ramones were punk, and Johnny was a conservative for most of his entire life and while he was in the Ramones. Now, most of his views can be disseminated from this interview he did in Conservative Punk, where he was interviewed by a sergeant in the U.S. Army. God, I'm giving this shit position so much leeway. In the interview, I'm just going to skip over this Jimmy Page worship here, he lays his political opinions out bare. To me, I think punk is right-wing. What happened in the late 70s and early 80s was a lot of disaffected kids, the kind who would have been hippies a decade before, drifted into punk. But when you think of who punks are, they're greasers, people who didn't fit in, but they didn't back down either, who above all, love America. Now, I don't completely understand where he comes from. It makes up a lot of sense until he gets to the who love America part. All these disaffected kids who needed community were disaffected by the society and the culture and the school systems around them, and American culture has always been right-wing. So the disaffection with right-wing would mean that they are most likely rejecting the norm. But to be fair, he does make a good point with the greasers. That's where the punk's leather thing came from. It kind of appropriated the greaser aesthetic for the modern times there. I don't know where the Who Love America comes from, but he then blames Kennedy for Vietnam. Fair. And then says Goldwater wanted to nuke Vietnam into orbit and he said that was better? You know, it's pretty punk. Nuclear holocaust of innocent people. Truman was the OG punk. He then says that Reagan was the best president of his lifetime, followed quickly by Nixon. Poor Jimmy Carter. He did the least amount of war crimes, and he gets no credit for it. But, and this is important, Johnny Ramone was not the Ramones. There was Joey, Dee Dee, and Marky. They were the main 3 pillars of the rest of the band. Though, of course, other Ramones came and went. But they were not right-wing. In fact, Marky even said that they were brothers in punk, but political enemies. All 3 of them expressed some sort of liberal political views or Democratic Party to certain extents, or like a little bit, but they were most decidedly not right-wing. Interestingly enough, the song The KKK Took My Baby Away, one of the explanations for it is that Joey wrote it about Johnny after he discovered that Johnny was having an affair with his girlfriend. Now, there are a little bit more disputes to this, and it's not concrete that this was the reason it was written, but one thing that people don't dispute is that Johnny used to make fun of Joey for being Jewish? I don't see a lot of right-wingers defending that one. Well, I see some right-wingers defending that one. Oh, and to kind of counter this with the punk community, I'll let you know there was a band called Frenzel Rom, and they titled a song, quote, "Joey Ramone was in a fucking good band, but he was a cunt. Gabba gabba, you suck." Can't get clearer than that. So it's important to say that these two idols that the right holds up as punk being conservative are in the very early days of the movement, where a lot of it was just kind of shock value and anti-PC, which we'll get to later. But they didn't really have any politics beyond that in their music. They just wanted to kind of scare people. Even Anarchy in the UK was just like, ah. That's what the Sex Pistols did. Apart from just spooking people and being scary, it didn't really have politics tied in with it until about the 80s, when it really kind of just tied in there. But their third mascot that they'll hold up is the most telling, and the one I see the least frequently, but we'll probably see a little bit more in the coming months. You probably know about the Misfits. You at least know their skull. Glenn Danzig is the most famous singer of the Misfits, but they have another one who started in the 90s and left in 2000s, and his name is Michael Graves. I think it's Michael, it might be Mikhail, I don't really care, he's an asshole. Michael Graves is a conservative. He even had a segment on The Daily Show saying that he was one of the few conservative punks.
If you're a Bushman, aren't you raging for the machine?
Yeah. Well, I think the idea behind punk rock was that, like, the status quo is no good. How stupid and lame is it to be like, you know what I think is kick-ass? The president, the White House. I'm so down with that stuff.
In this place, your politics fit right in.
Yeah, so Michael Graves came out as a Proud Boy, and holy fuck did he get dragged for it. So I think it's important to say, I don't particularly like the Misfits. I don't really listen to any of their stuff, but people in my social feeds do. And these are people who are not even leftists. They're like, there are some, but there are centrists and liberals there too. And when he came out with this, all of the Misfits fans that I saw fucking hated it. They were this the stupidest shit. They weren't even like angry. They were just like laughing at how stupid he was. It was really funny. And separately from that, they also said on their own accord that Michael Graves' Misfits is not even worth listening to, so okay. Now, like I said earlier, admittedly, Michael Graves isn't usually one of the ones that people hold up when they say the punk is conservative. Not like John Linden or Johnny Ramone. But he is, and I don't know if they'll say that he's a reason, because it was in the 90s, and he's not that relevant of a punk artist. But he is a piece of shit. So for these three idols that the right holds up that punk is conservative, we have a literal store mannequin for clothing, a bloodthirsty Reaganomics conspiracy theorist, yeah, that happened, and an irrelevant white supremacist replacement singer for the Misfits? What? Meanwhile, here's a short list of punk bands that have espoused left-wing views. Dead Kennedys, Dropkick Murphys, Crass, Propagandhi, Rebel Spell, Idols, Black Flag, NoFX, Bad Cop, MDC, Operation Ivy, Circle Jerks, Hoi Polloi, Subhumans, Subhumans Again, Bikini Kill, The Stalin, Dayglow Abortions, DOA, Napalm Death, Single Mothers, Pennywise, Agnostic Front, Leftover Crack, Reagan Youth, The Adolescents, Agent Orange, Pansy Division, Refused, the fucking Sex Pistols. Obviously, it's important to note that not all these bands are leftists, or anarchists, or Marxist-Leninists, or Marxists, or liberals. I'm just saying all of these bands have expressly saying about left-wing views that they held. Johnny Ramone, John Lennon, and Michael Graves didn't even fucking do that. Those fucking cowards. But there's another leg to this claim, and the idea that conservative was always punk is only a strand of this argument. The other leg is that they argue the brand of conservatism now is the new punk rock. This very claim misunderstands punk entirely. So I'm not going to say that I have the ultimate definition of punk, because there's been arguments of what punk means since it became a music genre, and it's going to go on until we're all fucking dead. So I'm going to try and frame it in what seems to be the most agreed upon ideals that punks have expressed. Punk means DIY attitudes, unabashedly being yourself despite your environment, living by your own tenets, and a supportive community. You may notice that I didn't innately tie it with any politics at all. And that's because as much as I personally believe that punk is inextricably tied with the left wing, that's not universally true. But I want to say that this inherently contradicts conservatism as it stands now, and I would also argue capitalism. Here's why this all started and why we're talking about this. Trump, he mocked disabled reporters, he called Mexicans rapists, and then he called all the media liars because they contradicted him. This, obviously, is not very PC. But you know what else is equally not PC? Those of you who are going to call me a virtue signaler no matter what I do are probably going to call this a cop-out. But I'm not just talking about the title and the main message of the song, but I'm talking about the lyrics as well that are exclusively, like, more in-depth than just fuck off, you're a Nazi. The song basically says, rob a fucking bank, you cowards. Fascism comes from the American state, and you're just fucking helping them. You're gonna be the first out when they actually get to power. Bear in mind, these are the same stripes of people that the right wing are calling snowflakes because they have this attitude. So clearly being anti-PC is not the one qualifier for being punk. DIY? Yeah, sure. Trump does everything himself.
Small loan of $1 million.
Except for the people who do work for him and don't get paid. I guess if you lie and you don't lose money on it, I guess you could say you did it yourself. Not to mention, all of the fucking spheres spouting this shit are funded by the Koch brothers and libertarian think tanks. Yeah, definitely DIY, dude. DIY. Just don't criticize the state, the system, austerity, police, military, the government, our leader. Yeah, super fucking punk, dude. Do you feel punk enough yet? Sure, they have a community, but it's not a very supportive one.
I found one testimonial saying that having healthy relationships in these spaces is functionally impossible, and one former I talked to said, yeah, when the alt-right isn't winning, everyone's miserable.
Now, you could argue that this is a part of punk, miserable fucking communities, but that's not the goal. They're trying to improve. Unapologetically being yourself is also not the only qualifier to being punk. Serial killers are unapologetically themselves. Dictators, war criminals, all three combined. I finished my beer, so I'm going back to the mutual aid. So let's review. 3 punks held up by the conservatives against an entire community and movement that contradicts all of that does not make punk conservative. And the main ethos of punk is immediately contradicted by all of the tenets of conservatism today, how it's acted out practically. So, why? Why are Paul Joseph Watson, the alt-right, these boomer punks, and these Infowar crowds all trying to say that their movement is punk? Reactionary movements are famous for co-opting rhetoric from the left, and anything that gives their movement legitimacy. Just look at Trump holding up a Bible, not being able to say his favorite verse from it. It gives him legitimacy.
Okay. You mentioned the Bible. You've been talking about how it's your favorite book. I'm wondering what 1 or 2 of your most favorite Bible verses are,
well,
and why.
I wouldn't want to get into it because to me that's very personal. You know, when I talk about the Bible, it's very personal, so I don't want to get into verses. I don't want to get into...
There's no verse that means a lot to you that you think about or cite?
The Bible means a lot to me, but I don't want to get into specifics.
Even to cite a verse that
you
like?
No, I don't want to do that.
People vaguely remember punk as being transgressive, and they vaguely remember it as being rude. They're transgressive, they're rude, ergo, they are punk. This completely ignores the nuances of a counterculture, and even the air raid siren loud alerts of a counterculture that is still going on today. Most punk bands, in one shape, one form or another, are left-wing. These bands put immense amount of work and effort into these messages that they portray through their aggressive music. And instead of sitting in a fucking studio with a world map behind them complaining about the profile pictures of people who are mad at them, they're creating music, they're doing the drive, they are going on tours, they are creating concepts, and they're doing it largely by themselves. Strangely enough, these conservatives are staying far away from the definitive right wing of punk, which is Rock Against Communism and related bands. But they won't accept them as part of their own because that would be giving the game away. Rock Against Communism is explicitly fascist. Now, it's entirely possible that Paul Joseph Watson doesn't know about the Nazi sect of punk, but apart from small pockets where it is an actual issue, Nazi bands have largely been evicted from punk. Why? Because punks have beat the ever-loving shit out of them. Yep, there's immensely stronger evidence that punk is more anti-fascist than it is conservative. But come on, Paul! You have Screwdriver, why aren't they in the driver's seat of this claim? Oh yeah, this was an extremely frustrating thing to research. I kept looking for claims that were different or like had a new angle, but it was always the same shit that I could debunk so easily like I just did. Fuck it, there's more evidence that alcoholism is punk than there is that conservatism is punk. Conservatism has always been, and will always be, the incoherent justifications and ramblings of a people who are scared to death of change. And folks, that just ain't punk. And you can keep Gavin McGinnis.